Fellas, why do casual MMA fans hate grappling so much? I'm not trying to be one of these fake hardcore fans that glorifies every single grappling exchange in the UFC and loves grappling so much, but I feel like ever since this Sean Brady versus Leon Edwards fight, we've been seeing a lot of just two men hugging. Brady's boring, not a fan-friendly style, the sport's dead. But what is it about casual MMA fans that make them hate grappling so much? Because we've seen so many boring striking fights too in the past couple of years at the highest level in title fights that casual MMA fans haven't really gone against. They've not really been public about. Like, for example, Israel Adesanya is one of the most casually known fighters in the UFC history, to be honest. And you look at his entire title run, the vast majority of his fights were boring. He's had a couple of bangers in there, don't get me wrong, but he's also had a lot of boring fights that casual MMA fans haven't really spoken about. Even Leon Edwards, who's one of the most casually known fighters, at least in the UK, has a very boring kind of point fighty style that casual fans, at least in the UK, haven't really had a problem with. And they can't really seem to differentiate fun grapplers and boring grapplers. Like, we've got fun grapplers in the UFC. Khamzat Chimaev is one of the most intriguing title contenders right now in the UFC, and that's vastly due to the fact that he's got a dangerous grappling style that people can't stop. Charles Oliveira, one of the most entertaining fighters in the UFC because of his grappling. Anthony Hernandez, essentially a modern day Cain Velasquez. We've also got boring grapplers, don't get me wrong. Mario Batista holding holds the elbow against the cage for 15 minutes was not entertaining. Fighters who don't look for ground and pound, fighters who don't look for submission and just want to gain points. Backpackers who just try and get, as much control time as possible so that they can win a decision. I get it, we've got boring grapplers, but you can say the same about strikers. We have fun strikers in the UFC. We also have boring strikers in the UFC. I mean, look at UFC 309, for example. I thought the exchange where Jones took down Stipe and dominated him for the first round was a lot more entertaining than Paul Craig and Bo Nichols standing and trying to strike for 15 minutes straight. Another example of grappling at one point being more entertaining than striking on an entire card. And we have exchanges. We have fun grapplers, we have boring grapplers, we have fun strikers, we have boring grapplers, but it only really tends to be grappling that gets the attention of casual MMA fans, and they kind of combine all grappling to just boring grappling. And when guys like Sean Brady, Merab, Jelton Ahmed, and Makhachev are getting called boring, don't get me wrong, they've had one or two boring performances, but when they just get called boring full stop, that's where it gets irritating, because these guys are manhandling people, especially Merab, picking people up and dominating people. Guys who are looking for submission, looking for ground and pound, looking to deal damage, looking to be effective with the grappling that they're doing. High finishing rates too. I mean, Makhachev and Jelton Ahmed alone have a combined finishing rate of 80%, better than a lot of the strikers in the UFC right now. You look at the comments under the Sean Brady versus Leon Edwards fight, it's a lot of, oh, it's a boring fight, total dominance, too boring to watch, boring, what a boring fight. And I picked Leon to win, but I actually appreciated the grappling from Sean Brady. Even Merab versus PTM, which I thought was one of the most dominating performances we've had in modern history. Not gonna lie, it's just lame takedowns, takedown attempts, boring, wrestling's boring, this is what people mean, and I completely disagreed. I thought that was a dominant display from Merab. Even in Makhachev versus Moicano, where, bearing in mind that Makhachev submits him within about 50 seconds of taking him down, Russian wrestling's boring, worst fighting style, good until it went to the ground, even though he submitted him in less than a minute. Even Umar versus Merab, which involved a lot of grappling, and I thought was one of the best one of the best title fights in bantamweight history. Without a doubt, as you'd expect, people complaining in the comment section because it contained a couple of sequences involving grappling. It seems like the crowd are silent whenever there's a boring striking exchange, but the second the fight gets taken to the mat and there's a takedown, crowd are instantly booing. And I also hate fans who simplify grappling as it's just two men hugging. I get it, you might not know the technical breakdowns of all the grappling exchanges, but if you're going to simplify it with two men hugging, you can do that about every sport. You can say that football is just men kicking a ball, basketball is just men bouncing a ball, rugby is just men running into each other. It's easy to simplify a sport of just two men rolling around on the ground like just two men hugging. Easy to do that. And I just don't understand. MMA is MMA, mixed martial arts. You're going to see knockouts, you're going to see boxing, you're going to see kickboxing, you're going to see wrestlers, you're going to see jiu-jitsu guys. That's what makes MMA MMA. It ain't the striking league with a bit of unnecessary grappling here and there. That's not what the UFC is. Which seems to be the idea of a lot of these casual fans. And honestly, what's stopping them from watching kickboxing? I know you can kind of get those annoying MMA fans that suggest you should go and watch kickboxing every single time you critique grappling, but genuinely, what is actually stopping them from watching kickboxing? These high-level elite strikers with a lot of knockout ability or high-level technical striking, no takedowns, no grappling, no submissions you have to worry about, just pure Muay Thai or kickboxing. What's stopping them from going and watch that? I don't understand. They refuse to watch striking without any grappling involved in these separate organizations that seem to be tailor-made for those type of fans, but they'll willingly come over to the UFC or MMA, a sport that involves grappling, and they'll go and complain about it. I don't understand. I don't understand why kickboxing isn't bigger than it is. Like, you look at the search volume for the most popular Olympic sports in 2024. Wrestling was one of the highest. Olympic wrestling or just collegiate wrestling in general, seems to have such a big fan base. It seems to be one of the most popular sports, at least in the world of combat sports in the world. And Dana White said it best. There ain't really any big striking stars outside of the UFC. You've got maybe Rico Verhoeven, who's gained a lot of popularity recently, and Rogtang, who's a bit of a clip farmer. But apart from that, there isn't really any big kickboxing stars. I'm seeing all these big grappling stars all the time. Craig Jones, Gordon Ryan, Mike Musumeci, Gable Stevenson, who recently lost in a massive upset. I'm seeing a lot more grappling than striking stars outside of the UFC. I just don't understand that you willingly come over to a sport that involves grappling and complain about it, but you refuse and you don't go and watch striking or Muay Thai that involves literally no grappling. It's tailor-made for them. And that's what makes MMA. You're going to see strikers versus grapplers, where grapplers beat the striker by using their grappling, and they do it in dominant fashion. You're going to see strikers versus grapplers, where strikers are able to beat the grapplers. You're going to see strikers versus strikers. You're going to see grapplers versus grapplers. That's what makes MMA. Different backgrounds, different combat sports going against each other. Who can win, who can do the best, who can implement their game plan the best. That's the whole point of the sport. And this whole narrative that MMA fans love violence, go back to UFC London that we've just had. Blachowicz versus Ulberg was hyped up to be a barn burner. This big light heavyweight fight between two knockout machines. It's not going to go the distance. Ended up being a boring fight where it's nothing but a couple of leg kicks every round. And they both ended up resulting in barely any damage being given. And it just ended up being a bit of a boring fight that was massively lackluster. Whereas the main event, which was a so-called boring fight, was Sean Brady controlling Leon Edwards every time he wanted to, damaging Leon Edwards with the ground and pound, and inevitably putting the cherry on top by getting a submission, putting on the end of the performance. And I also found it a bit ironic with this UFC London card that every single finish ended up being from grappling. Not a single knockout from the strikers. Every single finish was via grappling from some of the grapplers on the card, which I thought was just ironic how people always like to say that they crave violence. And some of these other striking stars nowadays, like Leon Edwards, Adesanya, Strickland, and Cyril Gane, some of the best strikers in the UFC, or at least have been in the modern era, none of these guys have a violent, heavy style. And I'm not trying to say that violence isn't in striking. We've seen some of the biggest violent displays in striking over the years in the UFC, where there's been brutal knockouts, bloodbaths, and I fucking love them, and MMA fans do. We've also seen these in grappling too, where people get taken down and absolutely mauled and beaten to bits with ground and pound. Guys like Anthony Hernandez, who take everything out of every fighter he faces with his grappling. Guys like Paddy Pimblett, who just broke the arm and submitted Bobby Green in the exact same sequence at UFC 304. Look at the faces of the Better Biev and Bivol after their massive boxing fight a few months ago, and then look at the face of Felipe Dos Santos after his recent flyweight fight with Lorna Kavanaugh. I feel like MMA fans nowadays, they'll see one boring grappling fight on a card and they'll assume that every grappling fight is boring and grappling sucks. Imagine we did the same thing for striking, where Jai Herbert versus Chris Padilla was a boring striking fight, so every striking fight automatically sucks now. And I've kind of come to the conclusion that casual fans will complain at any grappling, whether it's boring or not. You look at Li Jingliang versus Chimaev, everybody knows how this went. Chimaev picks up Li Jingliang like a fucking baby, like ragdolls him, talks to Dana White, slams him and gets the submission. You look at the comment section, people complaining about the fact that Chimaev makes fights boring, even though that was one of the most entertaining fights, or entertaining at least moments we've had in the UFC in the modern era. Or guys like Sean Brady, who's dominating Leon Edwards, or grapplers who are going out there looking for finishes, looking for submissions, looking to do damage and looking to be effective with the grappling that they've got, and people will complain. And then this might be a bit off topic, but people saying that Makhachev's a boring fighter, I think that's one of the dumbest statements ever. You've got a lot of people calling him a boring fighter, saying that he's having a boring era of the UFC because of these Dagestani fighters like Makhachev. If you eliminate all the fight of the year contenders that you've had, and even eliminate all the striking moments that Makhachev's had, and purely look at the grappling, how is his grappling boring? He submits Charles Oliveira, one of the best submission artists in the UFC. He just submitted another submission artist in Moicano in about 50 seconds. He's one of the best grapplers, one of the best submission artists in the UFC right now. And if he's not finding the submissions, he's going to beat the crap out of you with his dominant ground and pound, which he showed against Bobby Green. So saying Islam's boring, taking away the fight of the year contenders, taking away the knockouts and the striking display that he's had, and purely looking at his grappling, it isn't even like his grappling's boring. And even Marab, I understand Marab's not really a finishing machine. He's not really going out there and having these quick finishes like a guy like Makhachev, but he's still got a dominating style where he's dominating strikers, he's dominating well-rounded fighters, he's dominating wrestlers, he's dominating even better wrestlers in Umar Magomedov. No matter what style he's facing Marab, he seems to be able to do whatever he wants to people. And if that's not entertaining to you, I know it's not going to be a barn burner, but if that ain't even slightly entertaining, then maybe you're in the wrong spot. And it always confuses me how guys like Colby Covington, DC, Paddy Pimblett, Brock Lesnar, Ronda Rousey, some of the biggest stars of these past couple of generations who have a heavy grappling style get glorified. But I just don't understand. You've got guys like Makhachev, submission grappler, people calling him boring in the West, but Paddy Pimblett's automatically a fun fighter. Merab, heavy wrestler, boring. Colby Covington, heavy wrestler, fans love him, he's a fun fighter. I never understood that. And I actually think that star power has a lot to do with it. I mean, you go back to the Dustin Poirier versus Michael Chandler fight, and bearing in mind, I understand this was one of the best fights of 2022. A bunch of striking took place in this fight too, but the game plan of Michael Chandler did seem to be grappling, take the fight to the mat, and simply out-wrestle Dustin Poirier, and that was what he was doing for the first 2 rounds. And the fight ended in a submission too. Fans weren't complaining. 0 boos during that fight when those guys were grappling. But then you go to Pantoja versus Moreno, another fight of the year contender between Pantoja and Moreno, when Pantoja's not really that big of a star. And there was a lot of times in that fight when Pantoja would utilize the grappling and use his grappling base, and the fans were booing, the fans were complaining about the grappling of Pantoja. I think star power has a lot to do with it, because the classic Western American MMA fan want big stars like the Sean O'Malley's, like the Colby Covingtons, like the Conor McGregor's, like the Nate Diaz's. They really look for star power more than actual entertaining fights. I've kind of realized these fighters that are going out there and hanging out with these big stars, these big celebrities on these big podcasts who can sell a ton of pay-per-views. I feel like that's what casual MMA fans look for more than just the style. Like, you don't see these classic casual MMA fans hyping up Sean Brady, Merab, Makhachev, all these type of grapplers in the UFC, and that's simply because they're not big stars in the West. And don't get me wrong, grappling can be boring. I hate fighters who hold people against the cage and do nothing with the position, or fighters who take people down and look to get control time and gain points without looking for a finish. I get it, it can be boring, and we've seen so many grappling boring moments in the UFC. And I'm not trying to be Joe Rogan, who says that when a fight gets taken to the ground, no matter if the fight is stolen or what, they shouldn't be stood back up. I think that's bullshit from Joe Rogan. But in conclusion, why do I think casual MMA fans hate grappling? I think the first reason is because they can't really differentiate point grappling and effective grappling. Point grappling is when, like I just described, fighters take the fight to the mat and make it a bit of a boring performance. I get it. Hardcore fans, casual fans, we all are in agreement that this is boring, but the casual fans can't really seem to differentiate that from effective grappling. Guys who look for submissions, guys who are being very dominant and effective with the grappling, dominating them, taking people down, dealing damage with ground and pound, getting better positions so that they can find a submission, whatever they may be doing. They can't really seem to differentiate the two of them. I think that's one major reason. I also think star power, as I displayed earlier, that the Western's favorite stars aren't really grapplers. Some of the biggest Western stars in the UFC right now, especially in like America, Sean O'Malley, Conor McGregor, Jorge Masvidal, Israel Adesanya, Max Holloway, none of these guys really have a grappling base, and they have lost a couple of fights to grapplers during their career. Whereas these heavy grapplers, especially nowadays with the amount of grappling champions that we've got, don't really seem to be these big Western stars, and therefore Western fans have no interest in them. But then you've got guys like Colby Covington and Nate Diaz, who are massive stars, probably because of their personality more than anything, who also have a heavy grappling base, who are loved and glorified by the casual UFC fan. But in general, that's why I think casual MMA fans hate grappling. Let me know what you think and if you agree or disagree, and just your overall thoughts. Thank you for watching.